when I was younger, uh, later on, I sort of found the atelier world and, studied at the Grand Central Atelier where I teach now. But prior to that, I went to a kind of regular art college back in California, the California College of the Arts, and was an illustration major. And so in, studying illustration and then working kind of briefly as an illustrator after school, excuse me, it was all very heavily, kind of photo referencey, right? And I say, when I finished college and finished studying illustration, I did work as an illustrator for a little bit, not super long actually. It was pretty quick in doing that I kind of decided it wasn't really the thing that I wanted to be doing, and making paintings was really the thing that I was had originally been interested in. And right around that time, I found an atelier, very much by accident, actually, in Oakland, and it was called the Atelier School of Classical Realism. It was run by a guy named David Hardy. It's a really great guy, and that was sort of my introduction to like this atelier world thing, which I had never heard of, prior to that. And I remember I would show him, kind of some of the things I'd be doing, and he would kind of scoff at it a little bit and say like, well, the camera did a lot of the work for you. And I would sort of be like, what do you mean by that? And because to me it was, and I think so many people fall into this category at first, that I think in this point, historically, we almost sort of, if you're any kind of a representational artist, it's almost taken for granted that you're using photos. It's like, well, what else would you be doing almost, right? And that was very much where my head was at the time. And I was kind of like, okay, that's interesting. He's sort of got this, anti-photo thing going on a little bit, right? But we got, I liked him a lot. We got along well. I studied with him for a few years before eventually moving to New York to study at the Grand Central Atelier. But it kind of took me a while to really like fully grasp, the differences between those things. And for quite some time, I was kind of like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure if it really makes that much of a difference, whether you're working from life or a photo, and it really was kind of a gradual, almost sort of awakening in a way, to sort of the reality of really the differences between them, right? And I think that in a lot of regards, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could kind of come at the difference, but I think, one that, I mean, I think gets maybe used more frequently is, you'll hear people talk about the distortions that a camera gives you, right? That like the colors aren't really what you see in life, that the values aren't really what you see in life, that the shapes aren't even actually really what you see in life, right? And all of that is really true, right? But there's actually, to my mind, I think kind of even maybe deeper reasons that I find it, compelling to work from life, which is that the decision making that you make actually becomes different by necessity, right? And when you look at, say, one of those old like Dutch floral painters that have like 20 million different blooming flowers in the same sort of composition together, right? Well, obviously they weren't doing it from a photograph, right? And you're like, well, wait a second, right? How did they do that, right? How did they make this super, super finished looking thing of a subject that is gone in, a day, right? That moves even throughout the one day, right? Or you look at some, seascape, right? That, you'll see them paint these just amazing ocean waves and stuff, 200 years before the invention of photography, and you're just like, well, they did it somehow, right? Like, how did they do that, right? And I think the understanding, right, and the thought process and the decisiveness, right, that you have to cultivate in order to make that work to me is so much of the interesting part of painting, right? And lots of times another example that I'll use is that you can look at a Rubens or like a Franz Snyder's or a Paul DeVos painting, right, of all these animals, and you'll see these like half dozen dogs like fighting with a bear, right? And you're just like, how the heck did he do that, right? And it's like, well, how did he do that, right? Well, like he understood the anatomy of those animals really well, right? They probably watched them, at some way or another in action to see, how they move, how they do these things. They had this great understanding of drawing and how light works against form to make it all, sort of come together and be believable. And I think in so many ways, when we kind of get the camera out and go like, oh man, that's like really hard though. Like, what if I just take a photo and then like paint from that, right? It'll like hold this thing still for me, and then I can kind of copy from that. To me, it's sort of like, well, sorta, right? But like also it sort of takes like to me all the enjoyment, all the discovery, all of the, interest kind of out of that process, right? It sort of sterilizes it in this weird way by sort of sidestepping having to make all those decisions, having to get down to the bottom of all these things, having to get in and sort of contend with like, okay, what do I know and what do I not really know well enough to really pull this off?